Hi friends, welcome to this latest podcast of the Nationalist View. And today we have with us a very special guest, Colonel Miri Aisin. Colonel Miri, thank you so much for taking out time from your busy schedule.
It
And
really is an honor and a pleasure to be able to participate.
thank you. And we're going to talk about Israel-Hamas war, and we're also going to talk about a little bit about other terrorist groups and largely the anatomy of the Hamas attack on Israel, and which followed a very strong reaction from the Israeli Defense Forces. And a lot of people say we have done a recent podcast with Dr. Michael Rubin over also whether it has changed the Middle East completely. So a lot of these issues we're going to discuss. Colonel Aisin, though she doesn't need any introduction, the body of work which she has done and the kind of illustrious career she had. But for the sake of it, let me introduce Colonel Aisin with a brief bio. She's a fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism, and she has served in the intelligence community and retired from active duty at the rank of full colonel in 2004. Over her 20-year career in the military, she served as the deputy head of the Combat Intelligence Corps, the personal assistant to the Director of Military Intelligence, and as the intelligence officer in combat units and research departments. After retiring from the military, Colonel Aisin served as the Israeli Prime Minister's international media advisor from the Second Lebanon War until the end of 2007. She is considered to be one of the most authentic voices on the Israeli intelligence community, security, and geopolitics in the Middle East, narratives, and media as a dimension of security and warfare. So, Colonel Aisin, my first question is for our viewers, if you can explain that how the because you had made a very wonderful presentation in India recently during your visit at a conference, and I had happened to be there. So you talked about there also the anatomy of Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023. So if you could explain it a little bit for our viewers and how it is different from the earlier attacks.
When we talk about the Hamas terror attack on October 7th, 2023, we're talking about something that Hamas prepared for a very long time. And I'm going to divide it into two different aspects. The attack itself on October 7th, meaning the infiltration into Israel, that's going to be a terror army. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the second aspect that Hamas prepared for such a long time is what I'm going to call tiers of defense, levels of defense that were not prepared as if they were prepared physically underground, above ground, years in advance to support the attack itself into Israeli territory. So let's divide that first into two. The terror attack into Israel was a unique one, and I think we'll expand about that a little bit later, about that modus operandi which they developed, which every element we've seen in terror attacks, but the combination of everything together is new. And we don't want any other terror organizations copying this modus operandi. But the aspect of what they prepared in their tiers of defense is really where Israel, for the last year and 4 months, is finding the biggest challenges. Because beyond that horrific terror attack of October 7th, what they built inside the Gaza Strip as their defense system is an enormous underground subterranean arena, which is only for the use of Hamas, the terror army. This is something which is incredibly difficult for militaries to do anything with, and that's where Israel has been trying to destroy for over a year and 4 months, and you do it systematically, slowly, but there's no easy way to do so. It's built underneath the entire Gaza Strip, hundreds of kilometers of underground subterranean tunnels that interconnect, that are protected. That's where they put the hostages that they took that I'll speak about in a moment. It's where they have their own defenses. They want to pull the IDF underground. What it gives the terror army is both protection underground, but it gives them mobility. Mobility is a very military term. Can I keep on going with the other tiers? We're okay?
Yeah, please.
Okay, the second level of defense that again Hamas built in advance, that underground subterranean arena they were building for 24 years. This is something that they've been doing for such a long time. Above ground, it's taking the urban area. Think of the urban sprawl, a city sprawl, anywhere in the world, in India or anywhere you're thinking of, and in the structures themselves, in the buildings where people live, that's where you are building all of the different positions, assuming that the Israeli Defense Forces are going to come in. You come into urban area, which is always a difficult military arena, and you build into the children's room on the second floor and the third apartment behind, underneath their bed. You're going to have an RPG position, an ATM position, different challenges that you have there, but you build also the different structures and positions for the missiles, the rockets, the different type of projectiles that they have in the mosque, in the courtyard of the school, inside the classroom, let alone inside and underneath hospitals. And these are things where we say the term terror army. No army does that. A terror army does that. So you have things that were prepared years in advance, underground and above ground. But those are only two layers of defense that Hamas prepared in advance. They also took the hostages. The hostages were one of the main focuses of the October 7th attack. When they came in over 60 different sites, where they did it simultaneously, where they overcame all of the different defenses that we had and didn't have, we failed, a colossal failure, but that's a different story, not a happy one. But when we look at when they came in, they were coming in to murder, to terror, to brutalize, barbaric attacks in every way. I don't like expanding on it. It hurts me to even talk about it. But the focus was in coming in. They're taking 250 different hostages from the age of 9 months, where they brutally murdered a 9-month baby that they took alive at 9 months and then murdered the baby in bare hands afterwards, from 9 months to the age of 84, from different communities. The hostage taking is both doing it to terrorize, to scare us, to tear us apart as Israelis. That is their defense system, is that they're tearing us apart, and also to be used in a horrific way as a bargaining chip. So you already have here 3 tiers of defense that Hamas built over years, and the hostage taking was part of that. 2 additional levels of defense that they built up front over a very long time period. One is the international organizations, the main employer inside the Gaza Strip after the Hamas-controlled government was the United Nations organization, agency called UNRWA. A lot of people have heard of it. The United Nations Relief and Welfare Agency for the Palestinian refugees, who literally for the last 75 years, from 1949-50, have been the ones who are supposed to give what it sounds like, welfare. But they are the second largest employer. They are by far the largest education system. And they became also, in that sense, a cover where, in the defense, it means that they built both sites and capabilities, projectiles in different sites inside UNRWA schools, UNRWA hospitals, the different UNRWA facilities. And then it works out that the United Nations is being as if attacked by Israel, when literally Hamas is just deeply embedded inside that organization. So those are 4 levels of defense that were prepared in advance. The 5th level of defense is the one where Israel has had the biggest challenges, as if what I described until now have not been challenges, and that's the information warfare, or the terror narrative, or the legitimizing of a terror army. And in that one, on October 7th, on that day of the attack, while they were attacking, while they were doing their barbaric acts in Israel, taking the hostages, murdering people, killing, sexual abuse, horrific things. At the same time, Hamas put out 2 different versions of the October 7th attack, and they filmed 2 different versions. And those 2 narratives have had an enormous impact, because the one was to terrorize us, the Israelis, supporters of Israel, who saw the barbaric attacks that they did. It's to make us scared and change our lives. And for the rest of the world, it was to show how these resistance fighters are humiliating the horrible occupiers. And that narrative has been expanded horrifically over the last 14 months because of the tiers of defense I described before. Because as soon as they took the hostages and went into the tiers of defense, Hamas immediately presented themselves as the victims, as civilians, as Israel attacking them for no reason. And here we are in 2025 with those 5 tiers of defense still standing. The underground subterranean has not been destroyed by Israel. The above ground have been exposed, but again, it's an enormous amount to take care of. They're still holding hostages. The international organizations are vehemently anti-Israel. And in the information warfare, a large portion of the world has turned against Israel.
Miri, I wanted to ask another question that as you talked about hostages. So right now there is exchange of hostages and prisoners which is going on. US has, of course, after Donald Trump took over as the presidency, so uh, so there has been, there seems to be much faster movement. That's the optics which we are seeing. But how do you see this peace negotiation or the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire which we see? How do you see this, and how do you see this hostage situation moving? Because they're moving too slow, the Hamas, and for people like us who sit in this part of the world. So, when 3 hostages are released, so 300 prisoners, and I believe many of them dreaded radicalists, so they are getting released from the Israeli prisons. So, if you could, kind of break down this whole thing a little bit, and how do you look at it?
The issue of the hostages is a core part of the terror army attack on October 7th and of the, as I said, bargaining chips, but strategic bargaining chips of what they want to achieve. First of all, they want to legitimize themselves. One of the main things that they've tried to show over the last 16 months is that the hostages that they took from their homes in such a barbaric attack on October 7th are as if the same as prisoners and Israeli prisoners who are mainly men that have been participating actively in terror organizations, in terror activities, who were arrested while they were doing these activities, who were put on trial, who were found guilty, who were put into prison, and who are serving prison sentences for terrorism, as if they are the same as the hostages who were taken aged 9 months and murdered to age 84 and held in that subterranean arena. That's the first thing that they're trying to achieve. And for Hamas, that means that they don't mind how long it takes, because for them it's a bargaining chip. What they want to achieve is to get as many prisoners both out of jail, that is part of the bargaining chip, but they want it to be in the focus of the world. They want to show it because they want the world to not do the distinction between these hostages that were taken and between the prisoners that are inside Israeli jails. The aspect of the negotiation, because of that, is very, very difficult. There is no easy way. If we don't let out the prisoners from jail, then we won't get back our Israeli and non-Israeli citizens, people, mothers, grandparents, children. And if you let out these horrific terrorists, the term in Israel that have blood on their hands, it's both a combination of long-term prisoners who have been in Israeli jails for acts of terrorism over the last 10, 20, 30, even 40 years that have been inside Israeli jails, and different Hamas terror fighters that were arrested by Israel in the fighting in the last 16 months. So in exchange for every single hostage, young women, they haven't let out any of the young men, older women, children that came out also last year, because also last year when there was an exchange in 2024 in 20 at the end of 2023, we also had to release prisoners at that time. And that is their bargaining chip. That is the horrific world of terrorism. You know that in India. That's not something unique here. That is part of what terrorism does. They take the hostages and then they want to be paid in prisoners who have been put on trial and found guilty in jail. In the stages of negotiations, Israel tried to get to the hostages in additional way. We managed to release, to free some of the hostages, not a large number, through military actions, where we went into where they were held and managed to free them. 4 young people in one area, 3 older people in a different area. We did military actions to bring back the dead bodies of some of the hostages. But at the end, what Hamas planned on October 7th was both to take them and to hold them in such a way where if we do our actions, they murdered 6 young people rather than have us get to them. We inadvertently, so erroneously, killed 3 hostages, not understanding who they were. They've done all of these actions. That's part of the terrorizing. So when we get to the stage of negotiation, this isn't a happy stage. It's not a peace stage. There's no easy way. It isn't just an exchange. It's that you have to give up the prisoners, and Israelis are willing to give up these terror prisoners for the hostages. But it's understanding that you're letting go somebody who has killed somebody in Israel before, or killed many people in Israel before. These prisoners who are let out, some of them are from Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Some of them are from like East Jerusalem. Some are from Gaza. And part of the negotiation, and the devil is in the details, is where will these freed terror prisoners go to? And so that's why it takes so long. That's why it's so hard. That's why when President Trump came in, I would say that it was a lot because of just the change and the change of rhetoric, and that it wasn't the continuation. It wouldn't have been in any case, because it would have been a new president no matter what if it had been Kamala Harris, and as it is, it's President Trump. But that gave a vastly different momentum. And it opened up the door for Israel to agree to what for many people around the world is an impossible situation. We're letting out horrific terror prisoners, but we're doing it in exchange for our citizens. And what Hamas want to do is to prolong this, because every time they hold it, they're in the eye of the world more. As I said, their defense system is mainly built on the narrative that they are the victims. And if they're the victims, who's the bad guy? Israel. So that the whole structure, even of the hostages, is about legitimizing for Hamas their own people, and about the Hamas and Palestinians being the victims. And I give all of this background because we're in a stage where we've managed to get out so many of the hostages. We've paid a high price. We've brought in over 175 of the 250 that were taken. But there are still 59 hostages in the Gaza Strip. Of the 59, only 24 are alive. And I don't even know if for sure all of those 24 are alive. But Hamas have held dead hostages for years, not just from this war. They've held also other live ones. And I give all of that because that's where we are. It's like you have to negotiate it. You have to agree. It's never going to be easy. The devil in the detail is also, how do you actually do the exchange? And in the 5 exchanges that happened in January and February, mainly in February of 2025, Hamas used it as a stage that I call the terror theater, where they're trying to show also all sorts of different aspects that continue with that same horrific terror narrative that I described before. So I'm very, very challenged by the stage we're in. We've agreed to get to a certain stage. They still hold 59 Israelis, 24 of them hopefully still alive. And it's already been a year and 4 months. The ones that have come back have been in horrific shape. And we don't want to think, and Hamas in the last week have threatened that they will murder the terrorists. In the last week, Hamas have threatened that they will murder the hostages. They hold them as a bargaining chip, and they announce that they'll murder them if we don't give up what they want. We're talking about a horrific situation. There's no easy way out. There's enormous public pressure inside Israel, and I understand it because it could be your kid, my mother. I mean, in that example, in that sense, people aren't aware that there are 3 women bodies of hostages that were taken and killed. There's a woman there in her 70s, and you say she's not alive. But if we don't get back those bodies, then again, Hamas used these as bargaining chips later on. So right now, what we're trying to get to is a deal that will bring back all 59, both the 24 who were alive and the rest of the bodies. Hamas is demanding a price, which for Israel is very hard to think about at all. It's not just the release of horrific Palestinian terror prisoners from jails. It's also a realignment that Israel would leave all of the Gaza Strip that we have been in different areas of since the beginning of this war, trying to get to our hostages, trying to destroy Hamas, and to do so when Hamas still has viable capabilities. We've degraded them horrifically, and that's excellent, but we have not destroyed their military capabilities. Certainly, we never tried to destroy the ideology. That's a really big challenge.
So thank you, Colonel Miri. I think we'll put an end to our podcast here because I wanted to, discuss a couple of other things also, but I think we'll do a separate podcast, especially on the other threat perceptions for Israel and Israel's immediate security concern, and especially Houthis and Hezbollah. So, but that's an issue basically which needs a detailed discussion, and that also gives me an opportunity, to bring you back for another podcast on our platform. So,
I
thank
would
you.
be honored.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Colonel Miri, and I hope the hostages are released. And we in India, of course, we have always stood by Israel. There has been a deep connection, and there's a lot of pain and sadness in India, especially what has happened with Israel. So, because we have, as you rightly mentioned, that we also not only we also suffer the same brunt of radical Islamic terrorism, but also India and Israeli connections go back a much longer way than probably any other community. So thank you so much, Colonel Miri, once again for taking time out from your busy schedule, and viewers will be back soon with another topic and another discussion. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.